Today we're going to talk about the future of Bitcoin with one of its biggest proponents, and by biggest I mean over $1 billion. Michael Saylor is the founder and CEO of MicroStrategy. I'm Andrew Henderson. This is Nomad Capitalist. We help 7- and 8-figure entrepreneurs go where they're treated best, from lower taxes to dual citizenship to international opportunities. And I'm excited to welcome Mr. Saylor today. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Andrew.
You must be, I think, because you explain crypto better than perhaps anyone I've heard. I've listened to some of your interviews, and the way you explain it historically, as someone who I think came from a background that was not, entirely, it was a little bit crypto skeptical. You must explain it better than anyone, and I think you're one of the top 5 guys now in this space talking about crypto. Am I correct on that?
You're too kind. I'm happy to do my part for the team.
But you are really been out there because you run MicroStrategy, and I want to talk about what your company does and how that factors into this in a moment. But I saw just recently on your Twitter feed, your company has moved its treasury into Bitcoin. You own almost 71,000 Bitcoins. How does that feel?
Great, feels great. Look, I think that Bitcoin is the technically superior asset in the world. It's digital gold, and if I had to figure out how to invest a treasury, I'd have to go through, do I want to own cash? Do I want to own gold? Do I want to own an index of stocks or bonds or commercial real estate? And the ideal thing to own is a, 1/21 of everything there's ever going to be, and if Bitcoin is like Manhattan in cyberspace, then we bought 71,000 city blocks of it. And it's a long duration safe haven asset. It's not, you can't debase it. It's not a fiat derivative like a bond or a stock. And so if you're looking to the long term, out like 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, then owning Bitcoin is like encrypting your monetary energy in a way that will preserve it without any degradation over the long term. So I feel great about it.
I want to go back to the I want to go back to the beginning for a second. I was reading about you and your childhood. Your father was in the Air Force. Is that correct?
Yeah, my father's career, non-commissioned officer in the United States Air Force, 30 years. I lived on military bases, Air Force bases, my entire life as a youth. We moved around here and there. I lived in Japan. I lived in New Zealand. I lived in Colorado. I lived in Nebraska. Lived in Florida. Lived in Ohio. Here and there in Virginia.
Do you think that had an impact? Because I think, as the go where you're treated best people, and I look at people who have this international upbringing, who move around. I even think for myself, we moved around the same city growing up, from suburb to suburb. I almost think that was a little bit of rootlessness, nothing compared to you, but I feel like what you experienced, perhaps that was the impetus for this contrarian way of thinking and being such an innovator. Is there something about that international upbringing that contributes to where you are today?
I think so. I mean, I think it was really a good formative experience to see other cultures and to travel the world. I think that opens your mind to things. I thought it was very positive influence to live on Air Force bases. Air Force is a very forward technology thinking organization. There are airplanes around. They're always thinking about the future. I thought that was useful. I discovered science fiction very early on. And I read everything by science fiction authors like Robert Heinlein, and that had an impact on me. So the combination of all those things, and Air Force is about space shuttle and test pilots and astronauts and going to the moon and going to Mars and looking out beyond yourself and not being provincial. I think those are all helpful. They cause you to keep an open mind toward things.
Those are values that shaped where you are today, growing up on the bases.
Yeah, I thought it was really great to grow up on bases because it's a very merit-based egalitarian structure, which sounds kind of odd to say because everybody's got ranks. But the point is, at the end of the day, there was a profound belief that the most meritorious would advance, and you felt safe and everything was based upon integrity and duty and trust. And it's like it's a felony, I think, to commit adultery on a military base. So this idea that you cheat on your wife or something and it's a crime, it's like very, very interesting. They had different sets of values, as opposed to living off a base where you've got lots of other politics that impinge on your views as a young child.
Is Bitcoin partially successful, perhaps in response to the fact that maybe the West, maybe the world in general, but it seems particularly the West, is much less meritocratic today, where people aren't supposed to get ahead of their merits, and those who do are demonized, it seems, in the West. Is Bitcoin somewhat of an answer to that, do you think, or what's the relationship?
I think Bitcoin appeals to those that are on a quest for truth or integrity. If you're an engineer, you appreciate the concept of conservation of energy. And if you're a mathematician, you appreciate the idea that 2 + 2 always equals 4. And so the mathematical beauty and the conservation of energy and the laws of thermodynamics that are sort of embedded in Bitcoin appeal to those who wish to design beautiful things that work, especially when they see things around them that aren't working.
Well, I think it's a great response. You're an MIT guy. Is that your background?
Aerospace engineering, aeronautics and astronautics at MIT.
I said, this guy's 1,000 times smarter than I am. So, but I want to talk, as you talk about tech, you talk about your background. For people who don't know, you run MicroStrategy. It's a multi-billion-dollar company. What is it that MicroStrategy does?
MicroStrategy is an enterprise software company that sells business intelligence to about 5,000 large enterprises all around the world. Business intelligence software is used to design sophisticated analytic systems to extract insight from data. So banks use it to calculate credit risk. Retailers use it to calculate marketing and merchandising activities. Anybody that has large sums of data trying to figure out what to do next would typically create some kind of business intelligence application. And we have a set of software tools and servers that we sell to all those organizations everywhere on Earth.
And when did you start the company?
1989.
Okay, so over 30 years the company's been going. You're still running it. And you were, as I recall, originally a Bitcoin skeptic. Is that correct?
I think everybody starts that way. Yeah, I was a Bitcoin skeptic. In 2013, I thought it was going to go the way of online gambling, but I didn't really understand it, and I didn't really need it in 2013. And it was a much younger, more immature asset and a more immature network. So I think it took me till 2020 for me to need it. And then until you need it, you're not going to put in the effort to understand it. And luckily for me, by the time I needed it and by the time I understood it, it had matured to be a much stronger network.
It's interesting because so many people have been coming to us in the last year. They look at and I've heard you talking about this 2020, this calamitous year, which I think you've suggested. I mean, look at how well Bitcoin is done. And people have been coming to us because they're seeing for the first time the United States isn't what they thought it was, or their country, or their government's not supporting them the way they thought it was supposed to be. What is it that brought you around in 2020? Because I read that you were looking at different asset classes to move your treasury into, and it was gold, it was Bitcoin, there were different things. What is it that got you into Bitcoin, that turned you around?
I think the pandemic is a catalytic event and accelerated transformation in a couple of areas. Zoom went from 10 million users to 400 million users in weeks. Like we embraced remote work and video conferencing, and probably we leaped forward a decade. And in the same way, in March, we had a set of lockdowns, which really impaired Main Street assets and operations. But then we had a V-shaped recovery in Wall Street. And that K-shaped response, where Wall Street recovers and Main Street doesn't recover, caused me to stop and reassess everything that I knew about finance and economics. And at the same time as that, we had an aggressive fiscal response by the central banks everywhere in the world. And the real result of that is that the money supply that had been expanding by 5% a year for about a decade started expanding at 20 to 25% for this year. And now I realize, and we look out, and we have a forecast. I mean, most reasonable people would think we're going to continue to run deficits. The interest rates are going to continue to stay low. We're going to continue to create more M2 broad money supply. And we're going to be in a monetary inflation environment that looks more like 15% a year for the next 5 years instead of 5%. So 2020 was the year where you had a problem, and the problem got really big. In essence, the cost of capital for any corporation and any investor leaped from 5% to 15%. It used to be, if you didn't get a 5 to 8% return on your investments, you would say, I'm not keeping up, right? The S&P was about 8% return over the decade. And it makes sense to get 8% against the cost of capital of 5%. If the risk-free cost of capital is 5%, tack on 3% risk, you're at 8%. That's what the market looks like. What happens when the cost of capital goes to 15% and now you got to get 20% return on your cash? That ain't happening. On your bond, that ain't happening. On your real estate, on your stock. The only way you get over the hurdle rate is you either have to grow 20% like Amazon or Google or Facebook. You got to be a screaming great big tech company, or you have to leverage up. You have to borrow billions, buy back your stock, cut your share count in half, and that way leverage up your cash flows, which are growing less than that cost of capital. Everybody leveraged up for a decade. When the interest rate gets to zero or close to zero and everybody's got full debt on their books, you've leveraged the bonds, you've leveraged the real estate, you've leveraged the stocks. Big tech's had its run. What are you going to do? Right? And it's not a problem if you're just expanding at 5% a year, you're going to lose half your money over 12 years. Okay, you can think about it for a year or two. When the monetary supply is expanding at 15% a year, you're going to lose half your money over 4 years. And now you start thinking, well, I mean, half of my wealth is going to be cut in half unless I make a good investment. And every investment's getting a lot harder. Very complicated. That'll shake you out of your comfort zone and kick you into a search for something new. And that's how I discovered Bitcoin. And that's how most people are discovering Bitcoin. They've been forced out of their comfort zone. They need a safe haven asset, which is not pegged to fiat cash flows. It's not a function of the cash flow forecast or the bond coupon or the real estate rents. So what would that be? Gold? Well, gold was the best idea in the 19th century. And we can have a debate over how it worked in the 20th century. But in the 21st century, if God came down and he created perfect gold, he would create 21 million gold coins, put it on a network that you could move at the speed of light if you wanted to, and make it impossible for anybody to ever create any more gold. He'd make it impossible for a bank to steal your gold. He'd make it impossible for anybody to lie to you about how much gold they had in the vault. He'd make it perfectly transparent and he'd give it to you. That's what Bitcoin is. It's digital gold designed with all of the attributes we love about gold, none of the liabilities.
You've been critical on 2020, gold's performance. You said this should be the breakout year, and you said that's what convinced you that it was Bitcoin, that it did 300 some percent, gold did 15%. Is gold dead? Are you saying it's now going forward, it's no longer an asset?
Yeah, gold's dead money. Sell your gold, buy Bitcoin, because other people are going to sell their gold. And if you wait until you've been front run by all the hedge funds, when they dump their gold, you're going to be the last person out. I think gold's getting demonetized. That is, I mean, like being demagnetized. It's like there's $10 trillion worth of monetary energy in gold right now. Eventually, it'll only be the central banks that'll want to hold it. I mean, every private rational actor is going to move out of it and move into Bitcoin. What is it good for? Well, I mean, people held gold for political unrest. Lord knows you got enough of that this year. They hold gold as a hedge against money printing. We got a lot of that this year. Why hasn't gold tripled? Gold had a slight bounce up, but look at every asset class for the last 6 months. Look at gold, look at NASDAQ, look at S&P, look at bonds. They're all chopping. They're not going anywhere. What's working? Bitcoin's working. It's tripled or quadrupled, but let's say tripled, easy. Square is working because Square plugged into Bitcoin's network. Square lets you buy Bitcoin on a mobile app. PayPal's working because PayPal's plugged into Bitcoin. It runs on a mobile app. Grayscale is working because they plugged their mutual fund or their investment fund into Bitcoin. Things that are plugging into this digital monetary network are working. Things that are running on top of traditional fiat euros and dollars, they're chopping. And then, of course, if you're unlucky enough to have companies or investments in Venezuela, Argentina, Lebanon, Turkey, South Africa, fill in the blank, they're not working at all because the currencies are collapsing. And no company can be successful, no matter how competitive it is, if it's generating revenues in a currency which is collapsing or weakening. And so that means none of those stocks are going to be a store of value if their currencies don't hold value. You're swimming against a 15% annual monetary inflation current, which is in your face. It's a wind blowing in your face right now.
So let me be the devil's advocate, because I asked some folks in the audience, what should I ask Michael Saylor? They said, well, what's your argument? You see Russia, you see China, you see all these sovereigns, they're stockpiling gold. Are they going to turn to stockpiling Bitcoin? What happens if they create their own? I mean, what is your response to that point?
Governments will be the last ones to make this decision, but every rational actor will move before the government. So Paul Tudor Jones, Stanley Druckenmiller, Bill Miller, Rick Reeder, who works for BlackRock, Guggenheim, Skybridge, my company, Square. You're going to see an avalanche of smart money in the investment community, and you're going to see an avalanche of smart CEOs, and you're going to see high net worth individuals. Boy, it's like, you can have your gold. This year you got 18% return on your gold, but if you bought Bitcoin, you got 290% return on your Bitcoin. Okay. That's been going on. It didn't happen this year. It's been going on every year for a decade. Bitcoin's running 200% on average annually every year for a decade. So I guess my answer would be, how many years you have in your life? Because if I show you something that's doing 200% a year and the average thing is doing 10% a year and the best thing did 20% a year, and you wait 5 years, you gave up 5 out of 30. You wait 10 years, you gave up 1/3 of your life. You're going to wait 15 years and give up half your working life? Do I got to do it for 30 years before someone actually says maybe it works? Gold is antiquated store of value. It peaked in the 19th century. It's not working. You can see it's not working. And the reason it doesn't work is because you can corrupt it. You can confiscate it. You can hypothecate it and lie about it. And try moving $100 million of gold or $10 million of gold through an airport when you decide you need to change jurisdictions, or, when a country decides to tax it. How are you going to move it? It'd take you a year and have hundreds of thousands of dollars. So gold is this 5,000-year-old idea of a bearer instrument of value or apex money. If everybody in the world with money agreed they were going to use gold, the gold standard, it might sort of work, but it's too slow for the 21st century, probably too slow for the 20th century. So people moved away from it, and we've replaced it with something better, moves at the speed of light that you can program, smart money, pure monetary energy. You can cling to your gold, but it's like clinging to your Kodak stock because you like photos instead of buying Apple. It's like clinging to Rand McNally maps instead of Google Maps. The digital version is going to be 100 times better. And there's just you can cling to your horses when the automobile comes along. It's not a speculative asset. It's a digital monetary network, which is 1 million times better. than the physical monetary networks and the paper monetary networks it's replacing. So if you ignore it, you're kind of like ignoring running water and electricity and railroads and airplanes. It's technology, it's the future.
You described some basket case economies. Do you think there will be another gold confiscation or some kind of confiscation where the government comes in and just takes people's assets, whether it's gold or anything else?
I don't think there'll be confiscation like 1933, at least not in the U.S. I mean, I can't speak for every country. I do think some countries, like China, they're a little bit threatened by capital flows. Zimbabwe, when their economy collapsed, they didn't want people to be able to buy Bitcoin. If countries in a country where the economy completely collapses, they will probably be concerned about capital controls, and there'll be various regulations when you have a currency collapse. In Argentina, we had there are quasi capital controls there about how much money you could move out of the country, and so those happen from time to time, and we'll probably continue to see those. But in general, I think that more likely gold is just going to be passed over. It's $10 trillion right now, and it's seen its height, and it's probably going to peak and deteriorate by $1 trillion a year or something like that for the next decade. It's seen its best years. Bitcoin is going to grow past $10 trillion and then 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 100 trillion, I think, because it is the digital monetary network, and half of all the money on earth wants to be in a monetary network. We're looking for a store of value for half of our monetary energy, and currencies aren't working. Gold is not working. Index funds aren't working. People, as soon as they start to realize Bitcoin works, they're all going to jump on it. And how fast? Well, the thing's growing 200% a year. You can't grow much faster than 200% a year, I would think. So it's going pretty fast. At some point, the Bitcoin will be wrapped in a regulation that's at parity with the regulations that control cash, bonds, stocks, real estate, AML, KYC regs. I don't see that as being a problem. It's probably a welcome thing because institutions and corporations are going to funnel 10x and 100x as much money into it as it normalizes in that way to parity with stocks and bonds. So that'll probably happen.
Yeah, that's one question I wanted to ask you was, you seem okay with the regs, because a lot of the early crypto adopters, let me ask you that, the folks who got it in 2013, you've said that they were pretty courageous, as I recall. How does your view differ from their view? How do you look at the delta between getting it in 2020, getting it in 2013?
Well, you have different factions, and there's a dozen of them. If you're a crypto anarchist, then you're not really all that excited about government in general. You don't like any laws. You're not a big fan of taxes. People say inflation is theft. Austrian economists think inflation is theft, but I've heard people say taxation is theft, right? A perfect libertarian. So if you're an extreme libertarian or anarchist, maybe you don't like government, you don't like taxation at all. They're really fixated upon privacy and no AML, KYC. They don't want to, they want to trade through decentralized exchanges anonymously, right? That's an extreme. On the other hand, Mass Mutual, a big publicly traded company, they're not buying it for that. They simply want an inflation hedge, or they might even not look at it as inflation hedge. On that extreme, they might just say it's an uncorrelated asset, which is doing really well. Like if I'm just a macro trader, I might just say I'm going to buy 2% of it because it goes up 200% a year. It's uncorrelated asset, helps my portfolio. Then you've got people that don't really care for inflation, right? They want to preserve their family's wealth preservation or wealth creation or treasury preservation. For them, they need to buy it on a regulated exchange and keep it with a regulated custodian. A public company can't. It's like, we're not going to buy it on a decentralized exchange and store it in a private wallet that we take home at night, right? That's not happening. So those companies are looking at it as a treasury reserve asset, and they have a different view. I think in general, 99% of the money in the world, maybe 99.9% of the money in the world, probably wants to be in a regulated environment at parity with other regulated assets. I mean, they're comfortable with that. And so the future of Bitcoin is going to be determined by those actors, by the institutions, by the corporations, by the high net worth individuals within a given standard AML KYC framework.
We can talk about the politics of this maybe in a moment, but for me, I tell people, if you're living in the U.S., if you're living in a Western country, regulations are going to increase, taxes are going to increase. They've got people coming who they want to leave. They're paying big tax bills to take their crypto and leave. But then the crypto anarchists, as you say, what idiot pays taxes on crypto? You put it on a wallet, you fly out of the airport, you sell it, you don't tell anybody. What do you say to those people?
My view here is that if you're really smart, I mean, first, let's talk about wealth creation, wealth preservation. The richest families in the world, the way they got rich is they created assets or they purchased assets and they held them forever and they never sold them. There's no, John Malone never wants to pay capital gains tax. You never pay long-term capital gains, short-term capital gains. And then they don't generate income. They have appreciating assets and they borrow against them. They mortgage them. They mortgage their buildings. They buy a football team and they borrow against the football team. They borrow against their art. Whatever it is, you buy the highest quality asset, you hold it forever, and then you borrow money, and then there's no tax on money you borrowed. That's not income, no income tax. And there's no tax on the asset because you never sold it. So rather than jumping through all these contortions, trying to figure out how to minimize your taxes or the like, how about just don't sell it? Right now, what do you have to do to not sell it? You have to buy the best asset. If you buy the pristine, most technically pure, long duration asset, there's no reason to ever sell Bitcoin. You could give it to your grandchildren in a vault. It should last for 100 years, 1,000 years, right? It transcends a company, a country. If I have $100 million and I have it in land in California, California can tax it and I can't move it. I will have to sell it at some point. I'm going to get taxed on it. If I buy $100 million worth of stocks, right, I'm stuck on the New York Stock Exchange, or I'm stuck with a custodian. I've got all those regulations, and maybe income tax on the company will impair me. Capital gains I can avoid if I don't sell it. But the problem is the company has competitive risk. And if the company becomes non-competitive, you might have to sell it because the company's not a monopoly on pure money. But what's the best asset I can buy? Pure monetary energy. There's no CEO, there's no company, there's no product, there's no iPhone 11 to not like. And by the way, if you move from California to Wyoming, now you got Wyoming state tax. When Wyoming changes their taxes, move to Florida. When Florida changed their taxes, move to Puerto Rico. When you don't like that, move to Singapore. By the way, if I have my gold in a bank in New York, it's kind of hard to move it to Singapore. But if I have my Bitcoin in a bank in New York, I can move it to Singapore in 30 minutes for $5. So the beauty of owning property in cyberspace is it can be moved at the speed of light or near the speed of light for almost no cost. That means that the number of potential custodians goes up by orders of magnitude. All the custodians and counterparties are made much more honest because they have to treat you fairly. If somebody in Singapore will give you 8% interest on your Bitcoin, you can move it there in 30 minutes. If they change the rules and screw you over, you can take it back, right? You can't do that with gold. You can't do that with Apple stock. You can't do that with land in upstate New York. You can't do that with a bond, a piece of sovereign debt. You're held hostage by the bank or the counterparty, which has got a regulator, which has got a set of systems. And so therefore, the market optionality is much lower on every other type of property, and the likelihood you would have it impaired and you'd have to sell it is much higher. And so my answer is buy property that will never be impaired, that you will never have to sell, that is not subject to income tax, capital gains tax, employment tax, HIPAA tax, and it doesn't operate a business that requires import-export. Therefore, tariffs are not a threat to it. It has no competitors. If I took away all the moving parts, everything to break, what's left? One Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin is Manhattan in cyberspace with 21 million city blocks. Every Bitcoin is a block. You can own a block in cyberspace, but it's better than Manhattan. It's like the best city in the world that every rich person will want to live in for 1,000 years, right? That's what that is. If I could give you a city block and the best city in cyberspace that's good for 1,000 years, why would your family ever sell it? Because every rich family I know in New York City, they're rich because their great grandfather bought a city block and they've been just handing it down. And when the bankers print 5% more money, the value of the land goes up by 5%, and they refinance the block and they take a loan, and you can do that forever. If your asset goes up 20% a year, and if your cost of living goes up 10% a year, you can loan or you can borrow against your asset forever, and your debt to equity ratio will fall, and you will never incur income tax. You will never incur capital gains tax, and you can do it from anywhere on earth. That's a better idea.
But perhaps we have a bit of a disagreement on moving the goal, but I do understand the counterparty. What I think about crypto that I want to ask you about, the government's always behind. What you are hearing now is you're hearing about wealth taxes. You're hearing about Janet Yellen wants unrealized capital gains taxes. People say, we'll just borrow against it, never sell it, pass it down. What happens when South Africa comes along and says 7% a year, we want to take our piece off the top, or we're going to tax your unrealized gains? What is that something that you think is coming, and what do you do then?
I think the best thing you can do is make sure that you're mobile. And if you're not mobile, make sure your property is mobile, right? Own the most mobile liquid property on earth. What would that be? Think about it. What is the single most mobile, tangible property you can own on earth? More mobile than sovereign debt, more mobile than cash, more mobile than gold, more mobile than a house in the Hamptons, more mobile than timberland, more mobile than oil contracts or natural gas fields or ships, yachts. What's more mobile than any of those things? More mobile than shares of stock, more mobile than bonds, more mobile than derivatives. I just named $500 trillion worth of stuff, Andrew. What's more mobile than that?
You're going to say Bitcoin, right? So if you were starting over, would you start MicroStrategy in the United States, knowing where the U.S. is today?
Well, I think that's a different issue, right? I mean, you start a company based upon where you want to be to attract the right employees. We put MicroStrategy in Northern Virginia because we wanted to hire engineers. Without the engineers, there'd be no company. Sometimes, so a company needs human capital. After that, you need financial capital. Well, being a US-based company, we were able to go public on the NASDAQ. If we were, based in another country, Switzerland, we wouldn't have been able to do that. So we had good access to people. We had good access to financial capital. We had better access to customers. Most of our customers were on the Eastern Seaboard. That's why we did it. So I think you put your company where you need it to be in order to produce the thing that you're going to produce, to sell to the customers you're going to sell to. And sometimes there are some jurisdictions that are better than others. But I tell you one thing for sure, if Bitcoin existed, I would have bought more Bitcoin. But look, Bitcoin didn't exist in its current form until 2020 or late 2020. It's only matured as a digital monetary network since March. Right? Right now, you can look at it and say, there are $100 billion type entities that have all adopted Bitcoin as their standard monetary network, and they feel comfortable with it, and they're going to defend it. And I couldn't have said that 2 years ago. So Bitcoin's a new thing, and it's a new monetary system. I would say, regardless of where you put your company, you should plug your company into Bitcoin. The beauty of Bitcoin is you can plug a company in Switzerland or Haiti or Singapore or Malta or anywhere on earth into Bitcoin, and you will get the benefits of the most intelligent capital wherever that might be. If you buy Bitcoin in Alabama and you just hodl it, you put it in a cold storage wallet and forget about it, and someone in Singapore comes up with a derivatives exchange that's able to trade and finance and is the best crypto bank on the universe, and it attracts hundreds of billions of dollars of capital, that Singapore crypto bank will drive up the price of Bitcoin for you in Alabama, and you will end up rich because of something happening around the world in a different country, a different language, a different jurisdiction while you're sleeping. That's the beauty of Bitcoin. It's global, it's open, permissionless. Anybody can do something to help it. It's going to be improved by the highest common denominator, not the lowest common denominator. And it's happening very, very rapidly. That's the secret to it being the apex asset that's outgrowing everything else in the last decade.
A couple more questions. One phrase of yours that I love: stability is stagnation. And you've talked about things like gold. You said if you want to keep your money in cash, it's 0% or even less now. Stability is stagnation. From my perspective, and I know some of our audience members wanted me to ask you this, to me, the US is the legacy brand, or the UK or Canada. These are the legacy brands that people, they believe that they're stable. We would argue that they're less stable. Is there a case, would you ever look at moving to, living in, investing in, doing business in emerging markets that are less stable, including some of the basket cases that you mentioned?
Well, I think that one core requirement for a company to do well in any market is it has to be able to function in the currency of that market. And so if you're operating in a country with a collapsing currency, the Weimar Republic, Zimbabwe, Venezuela, it is hopeless. So no, if it's a collapsing currency, I wouldn't be doing business there. If it's merely a weak currency, well, we do business in 27 countries, so we're everywhere in the world right now, in Japan and Korea and Australia and in the Emirates and in most European countries and most South American countries. We struggle in countries where the currency is collapsing more so. But otherwise, I think you just have to be open-minded to every opportunity.
You've mentioned Malta, UAE. Do you think that there will be countries that want to stake out a claim, particularly smaller countries, as being the most crypto-friendly to attract an ecosystem? Are there particular countries you see that are doing that?
I think so. I mean, I think you'll see countries embrace it more rapidly than other countries. I mean, the progressive ones, if your currency completely collapses and you're trying to build a new currency system, your choice is gold, the dollar, or Bitcoin. Well, if you do it in the dollar, then you have to get the dollars from the US, and so you kind of lost your sovereignty. If you wanted to create a sovereign currency that's backed by a tangible asset, I would think that Bitcoin would be the best one, because gold's not going to work for you, not in the 21st century. So I think you may see people reconstruct collapsed economies on Bitcoin. I think you'll see other progressive countries, Singapore or something that'll be crypto friendly because they want to lead in fintech. In digital assets, it's like the granite that you're going to build Manhattan on, right? If you're building a bank on an asset which moves at the speed of light, that is thermodynamically sound, that's programmable, you'll probably build a better, faster, stronger bank. In fact, we know you can. So countries that want to prosper are going to want to embrace this digital monetary network. Look, I see it like the internet or like electricity. You're like, well, you think this country will let us wire every house for electricity? I'm like, if they want to advance into the future, they will. How about running water? That would be a good idea. What happens if we don't have electricity and running water? Everybody dies and our houses are dark. So what happens if we have a country without functional money? You can't have a functioning economy without without money that holds its value. So, if our currency collapses, we've either already de facto decided to operate on somebody else's currency, our neighbor's currency, or we better search for something new and different, because you can't build a functioning economy without a monetary system. And this one's the killer monetary network. It's going to be like Google times 100. It's just going to spread and spread and spread. And I think it'll just be a matter of time before companies and countries jump onto it.
In closing, any advice for Americans like yourself who are in the U.S.? A lot of people concerned now, incoming presidential administration. Are there going to be changes? Are there things people should do to prepare who are investing in your space in crypto?
Look, I think you should get educated on Bitcoin. If you go to hope.com, we have lots and lots of educational videos and materials and documents on it. I think that there's $400 trillion worth of monetary energy floating around the world, and half of it is eventually going to find its way into Bitcoin. So my advice is, this is the biggest thing that's happened in our lifetime, bigger than Google, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, bigger than the internet. And you're in the early days. Everybody needs it. Only 1% of the people understand it. Nobody can stop it. Right? It's the single most useful thing you can do to make your life better. So I would focus on it.
Are you politically agnostic, though, in saying that whomever's in power, you're okay? Any regulations or taxes, or they're coming to get you? You don't buy into that.
I think that that we're probably looking at a monetary environment where the money supply is going to expand. And everybody's working for cash, working for dollars or euros or some local fiat currency. And if they have assets probably invested in fiat derivatives like stocks and bonds and real estate. In an environment where I increase the money supply by a factor of 2, the purchasing power of all those things is cut in half. And so the single most important thing people need to focus on is how they're going to protect the purchasing power of their future cash flows. And how are they going to protect the wealth that they have already stored, right? And it doesn't matter who's in charge or which politicians are in charge. It's whether it's Republicans or Democrats or where you are. I can't name a country on earth that doesn't have a somewhat expansionary monetary policy right now. So this is an issue for everybody in every country.
We can find you on Twitter. You've got hundreds of thousands of followers. Hope.com you mentioned. Where else should we find you, Michael Saylor?
Best place is follow me on Twitter. I post all of my thoughts there on a daily or quasi basis, like Michael_Saylor. And otherwise, go to hope.com. Bitcoin is hope. HOPE.
Great domain name. I've been seeing you all over the place. You're on CNBC. You're everywhere. Michael Saylor, great to have you with us.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. All the best to everybody watching.
How can Nomad Capitalist help you? 4 ways. Number 1, subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell to make sure you get our new video every day. Number 2, get a copy of Nomad Capitalist, the book. You'll learn a lot of my personal experiences over a dozen years of studying this stuff, as well as exactly some of the strategies that you can use to build your Nomad Capitalist plan. Number 3, if you're not sure where to start, but you want to come and learn from my team and I, you want to come and mingle with like-minded people, learn more about our live conference, Nomad Capitalist Live. It's coming up soon. And number 4, if you want some help right now because you've got a burning issue, you need something solved, you want to lower your taxes, get a second passport, or build the Nomad Capitalist lifestyle of your dreams, go to nomadcapitalist.com and click on Become a Client.